So anyway, for today's class, we're going to talk about two things that are sort of related. One of them is histograms, and the other one is working in black and white. Now, when it comes to histograms, you have them in a number of different places. You'll find them in Photoshop. You'll actually see a version of them on the back of your camera for the most part as well. If you hit the info button on most cameras, you will eventually see something that looks like the graph in front of you on the right side of the screen here. And what it is essentially is a sonar reading of your photograph. It's showing you um, basically the light tones and the dark tones that are in the image. This is terrible. I am so sorry, but I don't have much choice. So anyway, I'm not sure why my mouse isn't working here, but let me try to get out of this. Okay, so I'll just pull this up this way for right now to show you that on the left side of the graph, this represents 0 on the 255, 0 to 255 scale, what you see here. So 0 represents the deepest black, and 255 represents the brightest white. And in the middle is about 128, which is neutral gray, or middle gray. So what this histogram is showing us is that primarily the image that it belongs to is primarily a darker image. Most of the pixels in the image are below that mid-tone gray. So it's an overall rather, a darker image. There are some pixels up in the brighter range, but overall, when we look at this, we can tell that it's a darker image overall. So let's go to that image. So again, we said it's a graphical representation of the ratio of light to dark pixels contained in an image. And that word ratio is important because it's not showing you how many pixels are in an image at a given tonality. It's just showing you the ratio based on the total number of pixels rather, how many of them are darker as opposed to lighter. But it's not giving you an actual count. It's just a ratio that lets you determine, by looking at the histogram, what you should be seeing on screen. And the reason this is important is because we can't trust our eyes. Everybody's working on different equipment that may or may not have been calibrated properly. Most have not, actually. So what you may be seeing on your screen from a particular image can be very, very different from what somebody else sees. And even if we did all have calibrated monitors and we did all see exactly the same thing, you still can't trust your eyes. I'm going to show you why that is. So this little video was created, I believe, at MIT, and there's a number of them out there that you can search for. But this will show you how your eyes can play tricks on you. It's called Kafka ring. And you'll see two squares with a circle, which originally the circle looks like it's the same tone all the way around. But watch what happens when they separate it. Suddenly the left half of the circle looks brighter rather than the right half. The fact is they're not. And it gets even more bizarre when they switch them like this. Now you really can see a huge difference when there really isn't one. And I was unconvinced of that at first. I thought there's no way, if you look back at this and look at that, there's no way, I thought, this is the same tone as that. So I took a screenshot of this image and took it into Photoshop. And let's take a look at it. Actually, I need a bridge here. Right, here it is. And put color samplers in those spots. So here's one. This is just a screenshot. Number 1 and number 2. And when you look over on the right-hand side, it gives you the RGB values for those two spots. Number 1 is 153 across the red, green, and blue channels. And number 2 is also 153 across the red, green, and blue. So they are identical in tone, but our eyes don't present them that way. So, Histograms are important because we need to be able to see actual data and not what our eyes or our computers or our phones or whatever are showing us. And you can always tell because those things are accurate. The histogram will be accurate. They are not dependent on the device that you're watching it on. They read the data directly from the image. And even if your screen says something is properly exposed or overexposed, if the histogram is saying that it isn't, then it isn't. So you need to be able to differentiate. So this is the histogram that we showed you in the first graphic in the lower left-hand corner, and it's representative of the photograph that's in the upper left. So as you look, you can see, first of all, your first impression of this image is that it is a mid to darker toned image. There's a lot of dark tones in here, but there are some brighter tones as well. In fact, if you look right at the very right edge of the histogram, there is a little bit of a spike right at 255 where that is white without detail. Well, those areas, if you look in the photograph, where do you think they might be? The truth is they are probably the light sources in the ceiling. There's a couple of them that are just completely white without detail. But because they're very small in the image, they don't take up a lot of space in the image. As far as ratio is concerned, they are the spike is very small compared to the one on the left. The one on the left probably represents the beams in the ceiling, the backs of the chairs in the foreground, things like that. And then everything else just falls sort of wherever it is. So that's a darker image and a histogram that goes along with it. And this is representative of a more high key image or brighter image. Now what you can see here is that there are a few spikes on the 0 side, which would be the fronts of those lids probably on the jars. And you can see the large spike at the right is not right up against, it's not white without detail. That's probably the background. Okay, so it is white, but it's not so white that there's absolutely no detail there. So there's a gap in between the edge of that and the edge of the histogram. There are a few pixels right at the edge of that are white without detail. Where I see those are in the specular highlights on the sides of those jars and a couple of other areas where there's a really bright highlight. All right, so let me get out of that. We are not going to get into lighting today. Okay, so let's take a look at an image like this, this is an image that's referred to in the industry as a Shirley. There's a whole reason behind that we're not going to get into right now. But it sort of shows you a lot of different things. So in the lower left-hand corner, you have grayscale step wedges as well as color swatches. And then the other parts of the image are designed to show you color, skin tone, and contrast areas. So that as you make adjustments in whatever you're going to do, these images are used for a variety of reasons. You have in front of you in one document a number of different types of textures and colors and tones and so forth. So the first thing we want to do is look at the histogram here, and when it comes up, if you're not seeing your histogram if you're in Photoshop and you're not seeing it, go under the window menu and select histogram and it will show up. So anyway, the histogram window will come up like this, which to me isn't terribly impressive or important. What I want to do is change this from the compact view to the expanded view, and then I also want to change the drop down from colors to luminosity. I just at this point want to see the dark tones to the light tones. And you'll see there's some spikes in here. And the other thing you'll see is this little warning symbol right here. And what that means is that the histogram is only a facsimile at this point. It has not been re-rendered to give you an accurate reading. And so to get that accurate reading, you click this little symbol just above that, and the warning symbol goes away, and the histogram flattens out a little bit. Some of those spikes go away. Excuse me. So you can see that this image there are some very dark tones in it, and that's represented in the upper right-hand image in those dark black areas. But the rest of it is kind of evenly distributed between dark midtones and light tones. And what we're going to do, and this is the second half of the exercise, or the instruction is convert this image to black and white. Now there's no shortage of ways to do that in Photoshop. There are really 7 main ways to do it, and to be honest, 6 of them I would not use ever. There's only one that I would use if I wanted to maintain the integrity of this file. But we're going to show you the 7 different methods, and I'm going to save a version of this using each one of those so that we can compare it when we're done. So the first one, and most of them are found under the image menu, it's image adjustments, image mode first, and grayscale. So it's just a convert to grayscale. And basically, you have no control over that. It just simply makes the decisions for you as far as how it blends the 3 color channels together. And so we're going to save this. We're going to call this convert to grayscale. And when we're done, we'll be able to look at all of these images. I'm going to go back through my history to my open state. And we're going to show you the second method, which is also under image mode. And the second one is converting to lab color, which is also under image mode here. And initially you won't see any change until you go into the channels palette. And you'll see that the channels have been split. Instead of RGB, you have a lightness channel, an A, and a B. The A and the B hold the color information, and the lightness channel holds the grayscale or the tonality information. So we're going to go ahead and save that. That is lab color. And we'll go back to our original. Alright, so the next couple of methods are under image adjustments. And the first one is very simply desaturate. Again, doesn't give you any control whatsoever. It just simply desaturates the image. We'll save that as desaturate. Well, saturate. I'm not sure what has just happened. Let me go back through my history. We did do desaturate. Let's just try the action one more time. There we go. Maybe you saw what I did. Maybe you didn't, but Photoshop just got a little wonky there for a minute. Okay, so we're back to our original. I'm going to go to image adjustments again, this time hue and saturation, and just simply pull the saturation slider back. This is exactly the same as desaturate. It does exactly the same thing. So we'll just call this hue and saturation. And go back to our original. All right, so now we're going to get into ones that are a little more creative. Also under image adjustments, and any of these adjustments, if you go into the layers palette, are also available in this little pop-up menu at the bottom of the layers palette. But we'll do the menus for now so you can see where they're at. The next one is gradient map. And when you select gradient map, you have options for the basics, which is will come up as black and white. But you can also go into these colored areas and get all sorts of funky looks out of this image just based on the color palette that you pick. Some of them look very much like a reverse negative, but all we're interested in here is converting it to black and white, mapping the darkest tones to black and the whitest tones to white. And so this one is gradient map, and we go back through history to our original, and we'll look at the next one. So we're looking at channel mixer next, adjustments, channel mixer. And this one's kind of cool, and it used to be my favorite. And what you would do would be bring it up and immediately click the monochrome button. And you'll notice that it gives 40% influence to the red channel, 40% to the green, and 20% to the blue. The reason for that is that the blue channels tends to be the noisiest channel, so they try to keep that down a little bit. But the idea is that these 3 added up to 100%, and you can see at the total here it is 100%. But what I can do, let's say I wanted her lips to be darker, I can pull the red down, which would darken her lips, and pull the green and or the blue up to try to get up near 100% again, just to darken her lips. So you have some control here. You can decide which of the three colors. If you watch the backgrounds on some of these images, you'll see certain elements will go lighter or dark. Whoops, sorry. We still, you do need to keep this near 100%. But there you can see in that upper left one especially, the change in some of those tonalities. And it tells you, it gives you a little warning symbol if you're or if you're over 100, which is telling you that you are you're pretty much overexposed at this point. So we're going to pull back on the blue again and give a little more emphasis to the red and the green. All right, so we're about 100% there. We'll hit OK and save that as channel mixer. Back to our original, and then we're going to use my favorite method, and it's also an adjustment layer. Mode adjustments. Excuse me. Oh, clicked the wrong one. It's actually black and white. And what's interesting about this is that you don't need to worry about maintaining that 100% look, because it kind of does that for you. But as I drag these sliders back and forth, you can see the tonality changes in the image. So I really now get to choose what it is that I want to be lighter or darker. Okay, let's just take this back to the original, which is what it suggested. You can also tint the image, and when you click the tint button, you then have control either via sliders or through your color picker to put a little bit of a tint on this image. If that's something that you like. These are still considered black and white images, but again, you can drag this through out and change the saturation of it and so forth. Typically, I'm not going to use that. I just want to make sure that my image has the tonality in the proper colors that I want. So as I do this, I'm going to watch my histogram. And again, when I update this histogram, I can see that I haven't changed it too dramatically. I don't really have any more spikes in this than I did before. There were a couple of things that went off the scale, both on the highlight and the shadow side. But as long as I haven't stretched that out too much beyond that, then I'm probably in pretty good shape. So let me save this. Oops, I have to accept this first, sorry. And we'll just call this black and white. Alright, now let's take a look at what those images look like. I believe I saved this on desktop. Yes, here. Oh, my lab color somehow did not get saved. Let's go back in, image mode. It is in lab color, but we did not go to the lightness channel. There we go. We'll call this lab color and replace the original one. For some reason this saved as a PSD, but that's not important for this. Oh, maybe it is. Okay. Let's try this one more time here. This should be a JPEG as... We may need to change its mode before we can do this. Let's go now to grayscale. And now let's save this as lab color as a JPEG. There we go. Let's see if that works. So this is the one we don't want. The lab color one is there. All right, so let's look at all of these. So, excuse me, the first one is my preferred method of the black and white conversion. And then, so you'll see that these are all different. Some of them you might like, some of them you might not like. Lab color I'm not a fan of at all. But the deal is that all of them, or none of them rather, except for channel mixer and black and white, give you any control over the three colors in your image, the three color channels, and how much influence they exert. So that's always going to be your best bet for black and white. And then, like I said, if you're watching your histogram as you do this, regardless of the device or the monitor that you're working on, you're going to be sure that um, you haven't completely. Let's just open this back up. You haven't completely lost the tonality that you want. Again, here's the histogram in the lower right corner of this image. And if we go back to the original, the very first one that we opened up, which is here, and we look, we can see that that histogram is not very different at all from the one that we ended up with the black and white conversion. So once something has gone beyond the edges on the left and the right, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to bring them back. There are some things you can do in, say, a levels or curve adjustment, and you can't do this on any of these upper sliders because all you're going to do is make it worse. But if you bring your output sliders in a little bit, now you can see what's happening to that histogram. It is bringing it in. The problem is it's also messing up our contrast a little bit. So once you're in JPEG mode, it's really hard to do this. However, you have access to the histogram in your raw file converter as well. So let me go back to this for a second. Let's see what we have in these folders. I can't remember these images. All right, let's take one of these. So let's say we want to work on this image. Again, you can convert this to black and white in the raw file converter, but you have no control other than just that saturation. So I don't recommend that. I do recommend that as you're working on your file in here that you do watch the histogram at the top. We can see where we're at already here. We don't want to create a problem. I might pull up the shadows a little bit, knock the highlights down a little bit, and as you can see as I move these sliders, that histogram is changing as well. This is where you have the most control, simply because this has much more data in it. This file right here has it's high bit depth as opposed to like a JPEG or a Photoshop document that's down to 8-bit. This is going to come out as a 32-bit file, or that's what you're working on at this point. So really keep an eye on this. There's a couple of other things you can do. You can turn on your clipping. Excuse me. So if I pull my blacks down, you can see that these areas that are the blackest in the image are going to start to turn blue on me. So I realized I don't want to go too far with that, because I don't want to get down into that range where I don't have any detail. There's a little bit of that will be okay. Same thing in the highlights. If I pull the highlights up too far, they're going to start to turn red. But if I pull them down a little bit, it just brings them more into range. So the histogram is something that you want to keep an eye on as you're working on a file as far as color density and all of that is concerned. Once you've made all of those corrections, you really don't want to go back in and do it again. You want to do that pretty much one time. Let me cancel this. And I'm going to show you a few examples. So this is an example of a black and white that is not necessarily a good conversion. And mostly it is because of this area right here, the top of this chair, and some of the other highlights have not been handled well at all. This image is overexposed in general. And you've got all of those highlights. If you squint at that image, that's the area that your eye goes to first. It's hard not to see that. So I would not consider that a good black and white conversion. Let me show you some that I do. These are from friends of mine, a couple both in Canada and another one in Florida. And these are just exquisite. Some of these are paintings. They're photographs that have been digitally painted. But you'll notice that there's no detail lost. It does have a range from dark black to bright white, but there's detail in both of those. Love some of the landscape ones. That is one of the better ways, or one of the better subjects for black and white photography. This one is really cool because it's basically shot in very splotchy sunlight. But if you look at it, you'll see that none of those areas of sunlight have been blown out or lost. This was handled really well when it was processed. And again, detail from shadow through highlight. Same thing here, here. This one obviously has had some additional filters and processing done because the detail that's underneath this pier, normally this would all go black. But there are some filters out there that keep that from happening, and that's been used on that file. Love this one. Very simple image. Top lit flower with a very black background. No need for detail back here, so the histogram on this is going to be kind of interesting. You can see that there's this huge spike at the left in the blacks because this whole background is black without detail, but the rest of it is very even across, but there's very little up here that's white without detail. Most of this image has detail in it. Again, a toned image. This is considered a black and white as well, but great detail throughout this. And finally, this one, which has some very hot lights on that wall and on her dress, but again, they've been handled very well.